A 36-year-old woman stood in a prison courtyard in Krakow, Poland. It was January 24th, 1948. Still dark outside. The temperature was barely above freezing. She had been a devoted Catholic. She had once been engaged to be married. She had grown up the daughter of a humble shoemaker in a quiet Austrian village where everyone knew everyone's name. And in the years between that quiet childhood and this freezing courtyard, she had signed the death warrants of 500,000 human beings. When the guards came for her that morning, she didn't walk. She screamed. She fought. She had to be dragged across the stones toward the gallows while the men around her laughed. Her name was Maria Mandl. And this is her full story. You're watching WW2 Time Tales, where we go beyond the headlines and dig into the real people behind the history, on the ones who are too disturbing, too complicated, or too important to be forgotten. Subscribe right now and hit the bell, because this is the kind of history that will stay with you long after the video ends. Let's get into it. Maria Mandl was never a member of the Nazi Party. That detail, confirmed by researchers and documented in the first ever full biography of Mandl, Mistress of Life and Death by historian Mary Lindstedt, published in 2023, completely rewrites the way most people think about her story. She didn't join the camp system out of ideological obsession. She joined it because she needed a job, and because the regime had already destroyed the life she was building. Born on January 10, 1912, in the village of Münzkirchen in Upper Austria, Mandl grew up in a Catholic household that was by local standards respectable, modest, and politically anti-Nazi. Her father, Franz Mandl, was a master shoemaker who openly supported the Christian Social Party, one of the few Austrian movements that openly opposed the Nazi movement before the Anschluss. Her mother, Anna, suffered recurring bouts of depression and had at least one serious nervous breakdown during Mandl's childhood, a household shadow that several historians believe shaped her emotional development. Maria's formal schooling ended at 12. She was pulled out of class to help work the family farm, a routine sacrifice in rural Austria at that time. She later completed a Catholic boarding school education, but found the job market hostile and unforgiving. She worked as a domestic servant in Switzerland, grew homesick, came back to Austria, worked as a chambermaid in Innsbruck, returned home again, and eventually landed stable work at the local post office. She got engaged. She had a plan. Then March 12, 1938 happened. German soldiers crossed the Austrian border without a single shot fired. Crowds flooded the streets, but to celebrate. Flowers thrown, church bells ringing. The new order arrived with noise and confidence. Within weeks, Maria Mandl's life fell apart completely. Because of her father's anti-Nazi background, she lost her government job. Her fiancé, a German soldier, ended their engagement. He couldn't afford to be connected to a family the regime had flagged. At 26, she was unemployed, unmarried, and had no path forward in a country that now demanded total loyalty. With no options left, she moved to Munich in September 1938 to stay with her uncle, a policeman, hoping he could find her a job in law enforcement. Nothing was available. Instead, he pointed her toward a guard position at Lichtenburg concentration camp. She later said she only took the job because the pay was better than nursing, and that she knew nothing about concentration camps. That is very hard to believe. On October 15, 1938, Mandl walked into Lichtenburg, one of the earliest SS-run women's camps in the Nazi system. Her cousin, Maria Gruber, went through the same training program alongside her. The training included loyalty oaths to Hitler, SS camp rules, and direct exposure to prisoner abuse. Maria Gruber quit in disgust. Maria Mandl stayed. Maria Mandl did not. Instead, she began beating prisoners. War survivors Emily Noy and Lena Haag both testified that Mandl tortured women at Lichtenburg while they were stripped naked and tied to a wooden post, whipping them with a dog whip while camp officials watched. In one documented incident, she struck a prisoner repeatedly with a metal key until the woman lost consciousness, then dragged her across the courtyard and threw her into solitary confinement. She had been on the job less than 6 months. On May 15, 1939, Mandl was transferred to Ravensbruck, the largest women's concentration camp in the Nazi system, where more than 130,000 women passed through during the war, and the majority did not survive. And here, we encounter the romantic detail that almost no one talks about. At Ravensbruck, Mandl entered into a relationship with an SS officer named Edmund Breuning to an Obersturmführer stationed at the camp. The relationship was real, and for a brief period, by all accounts, Mandl genuinely invested herself in it. Then Breuning left her for another woman, What happened next is documented in testimony and historical record. The number of prisoners shot and punished by Mandl increased sharply after the breakup. Historians have noted the direct correlation. Her personal heartbreak, a very human experience, translated directly into accelerated violence against thousands of helpless women who had nothing to do with her pain. This is one of the most chilling psychological details in Mandl's entire story, because it reveals something important. Her cruelty was not purely ideological, it was personal, it was emotional. It was the rage of a woman who felt discarded, channeled into the only direction the camp system gave her. Downward, always downward, at people who couldn't fight back. At Ravensbrück, she patrolled constantly with a trained dog. If a prisoner caught her attention for any reason, a glance, a sound, a posture she disliked, she released the animal. Survivors describe women torn to pieces in the yard. She always carried a whip, using it on backs, faces, and hands. She once beat a prisoner to death for picking up a scrap of discarded food from the ground. She beat an elderly woman in a corridor until the woman died on the stone floor, then stepped over the body and kept walking. In early spring and late autumn, she banned prisoners from wearing shoes during roll calls. When these roll calls began at 4 a.m. and ran until 6 a.m. on frost-covered ground, if an older prisoner placed a piece of paper under her feet for warmth, Mandl would drag her out of line and beat her unconscious. Prisoners who had seen her before passed whispered warnings through the rows whenever she approached. "She's here. Be still. Don't breathe." Everyone went silent. In 1942, as the Holocaust entered its most industrial phase, the SS established a major women's camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Mandl was promoted and transferred there as SS Lagerführerin, the highest position any woman could hold in the entire Nazi camp hierarchy. She reported to one person, Rudolf Höss, the camp commandant, who trusted her completely. Here is the scale of what that meant. Mandl controlled all female SS guards across Auschwitz-Birkenau and its subcamps, including facilities at Hindenburg, Lichtenberg, and Reiskow. She oversaw tens of thousands of prisoners. She participated in selections on the arrival ramps. Those horrific scenes where new arrivals were sorted left or right within minutes of stepping off the trains. Left meant forced labor. Right meant the gas chambers within the hour. Mandl stood in those selections and pointed. Survivor Anita Lasker-Wallfish, the cellist who lived through Auschwitz and testified for decades after the war, described Mandl standing at the camp gate while prisoners were lined up. If a prisoner made eye contact, any prisoner, for any reason, Mandl stepped forward, pointed at them, and they were removed from the line and killed. She signed formal death lists on a weekly basis, lists that bore her name and her signature in ink. Those lists still exist in Polish archives. But here is the detail that makes historians stop and stare. This same woman, the one pointing people toward gas chambers, also created the Women's Orchestra of Auschwitz. In 1943, Mandl personally organized a full orchestra from among the female inmates of Birkenau. These were professional musicians, violinists, cellists, pianists, pulled from the general prison population and given instruments. They were ordered to play. They played as columns of prisoners marched to forced labor each morning. They played as those same exhausted columns dragged themselves back each evening. They played as new arrivals were escorted past the gates, not yet understanding what this place was. Every Sunday, and they performed formal concerts for SS personnel. One more detail that has never fully been explained. Mandl reportedly adopted several young children from incoming transports, took personal interest in them, brought them small gifts, showed them something resembling affection. Then when her interest faded, she sent them to the gas chambers herself. Culture and murder, tenderness and execution. The same hands, the same woman, the same morning. By late 1944, the Soviet Red Army was advancing hard from the east. Auschwitz was being evacuated, records burned, prisoners force-marched west into Germany. In December 1944, Mandl was transferred to the Mettenheim concentration camp in the Mühldorf complex, a sub-camp network of Dachau, where 500 female prisoners were being worked to death constructing underground factories for the Messerschmitt. Me-262, Nazi Germany's advanced jet aircraft program. Conditions were catastrophic. Starvation was the norm. Mortality was extreme. And there, in that place, Maria Mandl fell in love again, this time with Walter Adolf Langleis, the camp's commandant. The relationship developed in early 1945 as Allied bombs were already falling on German cities and the Nazi state was collapsing around them. When American air forces began bombing the region in May 1945, Mandl and Langless fled together, escaping into the nearby Alps, taking a Jewish prisoner named Mose with them for reasons that have never been fully explained by historians. They evaded capture for 3 months. In August 1945, an American military police finally caught up with them at Langless's home in Hof, Bavaria. Mandl was arrested, imprisoned at the former Dachau camp, and interrogated by American officers. She was then extradited to Poland, where a very different justice was waiting. In Krakow, Mandl faced the Auschwitz trial, which opened on November 24, 1947, before the Polish Supreme National Tribunal. 44 SS personnel were accused. Mandl was one of only 4 women among the defendants. The international press attended. Survivor after survivor took the stand. The testimonies were specific, detailed, and devastating. Beatings, selections, children taken, women torn apart by dogs, death lists signed in blue ink with her name. At first, Mandl denied everything. Then on March 5, 1947, after months of interrogation, she confessed. She admitted to signing most of the death lists during her time at Birkenau. She later tried to justify her behavior in written prison documents, claiming that order and discipline had been her priority and that she had tried to help prisoners. No one in that courtroom believed her. Based on the death lists bearing her signature, Mandl is believed complicit in the deaths of approximately 500,000 people. On December 22, 1947, the tribunal sentenced Maria Mandl to death by hanging. She begged for mercy. She petitioned Polish President Bolesław Bierut personally for clemency. He rejected her without reply. In her final days, she withdrew completely. She prayed in her cell. She cried. The woman who had once ruled thousands with a whip and a word now sat alone in a 6-foot room, waiting. In her death cell neighbor was a Polish woman named Stanisława Rafał, sentenced to death by the communist government for her work in the Polish underground resistance. 2 women from opposite sides of the war, waiting for the same ending, sharing the same wall. January 24, 1948, 7 a.m., Krakow prison. The group of convicted Auschwitz SS members were taken to the courtyard one by one. Mandl was kept for last. She watched the others go. She heard everything. When the guards came for her, she broke. She screamed. She physically resisted. Guards had to seize her and drag her body across the courtyard stones toward the gallows. Witnesses, and this is documented, noted that the prison director, the prosecutor, and several of the guards were intoxicated. As they dragged her, they taunted her. They laughed. They poked fun at the woman who had once been the most feared figure in the largest death camp on earth. She closed her eyes, and she said her final words, quietly, clearly, to no one in particular. Polska żyje. Poland lives. At 7:32 a.m., the execution was completed. In the hours after her death, her body was transferred to the Jagiellonian University Medical College, used for student medical study for 6 weeks. On March 6, 1948, what remained was buried in an unmarked wooden box at the Rakowicki Cemetery in Krakow. No headstone, no name, no marker. Her father, the shoemaker who had opposed the Nazis his entire life, did not request her remains. The door he closed on her in 1945 stayed closed. Her mother had already died, but while she lived, she prayed every day for her daughter's soul. The quiet, one desperate prayer of a woman who loved someone she no longer recognized. No prayer could rebuild what Maria Mandl had destroyed. Here is what stays with me about this story. Maria Mandl was not born into evil. She was born into a small house with a shoemaker father and a mother who prayed. She had heartbreaks, ambitions, a fiancé she loved and lost. She was ordinary, completely, undeniably ordinary, right up until the moment she chose not to be. That is what history is actually asking us to sit with. If this video made you think, drop a comment. Tell us the moment in this story that hit you hardest. Was it the orchestra? The children? The final words? Share this video with someone who needs to understand this history. And if you're not subscribed to WW2 Time Tales, hit that bell. We upload new deep dive documentaries every week. Because the people in these stories deserve to be remembered. All of them. The victims most of all. We'll see you in the next one.